Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Note Closures. Scott Carson, jacked to be here with you today. And we've got a very special guest on here today, a friend of mine. Always seem to run into him in great places. Saw him at FinCon again, where we originally met about 4 years ago. This guy was a previous guest on the podcast, and I wanted to bring him back on. If you're like me and you're probably on a lot of different, email newsletters, stuff like that, you've probably seen people pop up, about how to buy a note not only just on real estate, but also how to buy a note, or it's a great deal to buy a note on a business. And our guest expert is the number one, I say the most renowned expert when it comes to buying and selling a small business. A friend of ours, he's the author of 2 books that you definitely want to go out and take a look at, if not buy them. And we're making sure you can see can you see my screen there? There we go. The first one is Buying versus Starting a Small Business, a guide to keep you from going to broke, which is very, very important. And then 21 Stupid Things People Do When Trying to Buy a Business. Dave, our good buddy David Barnett joined us here. David, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, Scott. I'm so happy to be here. I love talking about this stuff, and I always have fun when I'm visiting on people's podcasts. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned when we were in Portland just a second ago that you actually talked about the topic today a few years ago at Bill Moncaro's Paper Source Convention, correct?
It was 2018 in Las Vegas, and Bill invited me to come and talk about business notes, how they're created, and are they potentially an investment someone might want to buy. And so I I don't want to spill the beans or anything up front here, but I think maybe we should address it in exactly the same order. Just
I think it's great.
Yeah. So let's first start off by talking about a real estate note. So you got a house, it's worth whatever the house is worth in that neighborhood for that size of house, right? It's always based on local markets. And then someone buys that house and they put some kind of down payment usually. And then if the seller holds a note, well, that note is secured by the house and the house holds a certain value. And we're talking about a tangible thing that you can touch. And of course, houses do need maintenance and upkeep and all that kind of stuff, but they hold their value pretty well. And if you ever had to repossess the house, maybe you've got to give it some paint and some love or whatever, but you should be able to resurrect some value out of it. So that's what I think makes note investing on real estate so appealing, because you've got that tangible real asset there that kind of protects your investment. When it comes to businesses, um, businesses are bought and sold based on the cash flow they produce. So you could have a business which only has $100,000 worth of stuff in it, equipment, machinery, inventory. But because it's a well run, profitable business, someone might agree to buy that business for $250,000. And the difference between the stuff that's in the business, its value, and what someone agrees to pay for a business is what we call goodwill. Now, that business, as I just said, someone's willing to pay 250,000 for it. If somebody went to a bank and said, I want to buy that business, the banker might make them a loan based on the $250,000 value. And the only reason that the bank is willing to even consider that deal is because there is a guarantee possibly available to the bank in the form of an SBA guarantee. Okay. So that kind of gives the bank an added degree of security that if they don't collect on that note, that Uncle Sam is going to help them out. And so when we have a business note, it's usually because someone did not get all of the money from a bank to go buy the business. And so they've had to come up with some other kind of deal to buy that business, just like we're talking about with real estate, right? So the buyer maybe brought some kind of money down. Let's again use this $250,000 business. Maybe they brought in 50,000 of their own money. And we know that there's $100,000 worth of stuff there. So maybe they did get some kind of bank financing, maybe for the larger pieces of equipment. Maybe let's say there's a vehicle there, a delivery truck or something. So the bank gave them a loan on that. And now the bank's got a lien on that truck. And how did the buyer get the balance of the business? Well, the seller probably held a note. And what you'll notice in that scenario is that there's no more collateral. Like the thing that really held value has been pledged to the bank for that loan, and really the seller note is basically backed up by the goodwill value of the business. It's very ethereal, and there's a very good reason why sellers of small businesses are able to do this, because for the seller of a small business, they can actually, if they ever needed to, foreclose on that note, and they know how to run the business. So they could take the business back if they weren't receiving payments, and they could potentially get the business performing again. And so that person is able to hold that note and have some degree of control over the scenario. Smart sellers who end up doing this, they also need to act like bankers. So they'll ask for things like monthly, P&L. They'll want maybe the bank statements. They'll ask for things that allow them to keep an eye on what's going on in the business so that they can maybe try to foresee if trouble's coming. I always coach people that are doing these deals that as a seller, really sellers don't want to ever have to foreclose on these businesses. They want their money. I always tell sellers when you get into this scenario, you are signing up for a business coaching role because you're going to have to make yourself available to that buyer. And when you see things happening in the business that you know are going to lead to trouble, you have to pick up the phone and call them and say, look, I've seen this one before. Here's what's happening, or talk to me about that receivable that's getting later and later. And you're going to advise these people to help keep them on track. This is actually one of the big reasons why people who buy a business may want to have a seller note, because they know that it ties the seller into their success and makes them available over the long term. So, so that's how these seller notes get created. Um, you know, would they make a good investment? I always ask people who might buy one in a secondary market, would you be able to step in and run that business if you had to try to salvage the value in that note? And then I guess it really comes down to, what degree of discount maybe you're able to negotiate on the note, et cetera. What kinds of things have you seen people do?
Well, I think it's funny because I see people coming to me because they think the yield's going to be great, and I always tell them my advice has always been number one rule is don't buy a note on something you don't want to end up owning or operating, like you mentioned out there for you. And if you had to foreclose, is it going to be worth your time to do that? So that's one question I have for you. To foreclose on a business, is it a different time frame than, say, like we have here in the States, where it's a judicial process or non-judicial process, where it can non-judicial is kind of faster to foreclose versus a judicial, which can take 6 to 12 months or longer? So can you
Yeah.
answer that question first, David?
I can't, well, I can give you some examples of what I've seen, but I can't really answer the question because I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
But here's the number one thing is the note subordinate to another lien holder? So if there is, for example, an SBA loan in place, I've known other people who've done lending in the US who've told me that if you're in second place behind an SBA lien, that you really don't have a lot of power or control. You have subordinated all of your rights as a creditor, basically, and they drive the bus. What some attorneys have told me is that it depends on what your paperwork says, because your paperwork is going to say what the circumstances of default are, and what the timelines even could be. It's all negotiated up front. In a good scenario between a business buyer and someone who is holding a note on that business, there should be a good degree of communication. And like I said, you want reporting in place. So the normal holder of the note, of course, is the seller of the business. And that person, like I described before, should be keeping a close eye on what's going on in the business. The Someone who comes in a secondary fashion and buys that note, if they are also an expert in that industry, they might be able to step into that person's shoes and be able to interpret the information being given to them, and know what's going on. Um, that would be kind of rare. And, you know, maybe if it was a business that was extremely standard, like all Subway franchises are pretty much alike, right? But two roofing businesses can be very different. Even though they're in the same sort of industry, they can be run in a different way. They can rely upon different, uh, you know, uh, centers of influence to be referring business to them. They can be relying on different models. One of them could have employees, the other could be using subcontractors. Like business is something that can be very unique. People can whip up any kind of solution they can, and if it will be accepted by the market, then they're in business, right? You're off and running. And so there's a lot of unknowns, and it is not going to be as formulaic as a process maybe that you've put in place for investing in real estate notes, where you know the rules according to the state that you're in, and you kind of, if you've been through the dance once, you kind of know how it's going to go again and again.
That makes a lot of sense there for folks out there. So definitely double checking and checking title, I guess you could say, to research as far as what kind of liens or other loans are in place, like you said, SBA or bank loans, and if your loan is subordinate to those. What about any type of non-compete clause with the owner who's selling you the property? What can stop them from just saying, "Hey, I'm going to get rid of all my problems with this one and move on over to something else and start the business again, be your competitor"?
Well, it's a great point, and usually the buyers are concerned about a seller competing with them if they feel that that's a risk, and then they'll usually ask the sellers to get into some kind of non-compete agreement. And this again can vary by jurisdiction. In general, from the conversations I've had with attorneys, the non-compete agreement has to relate to a couple of things. It's got to relate, number one, to the actual marketplace. So if you own a noodle stand in a neighborhood, you can't ask for a non-compete forbidding the seller from opening a restaurant in the state, because your market is not the state. Your market is the neighborhood, right? So it's got to relate to where the business actually happens, and the time has got to relate to the amount of time that it would take for the goodwill to transfer. So if you are like a wholesale distributor, it would be reasonable to ask for several years of non-compete so that you can really forge a new relationship with the people that are your customers. If it's more of a transactional kind of business, that might not be as reasonable a time frame. And the reasonableness, I guess, is what gets tested if it were ever going to go to court, which again opens another whole conversation, which is simply this. Um, it doesn't matter what agreements say. Agreements just open the door to be able to go to court and to pay a retainer to an attorney to go represent your interests. And uh, as most people know, if you open the door to going down that legal pathway, you're opening the door to a multi-year solution that's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. And if the seller of the business did go and open a competing business and they did manage to attract most of the customers, well, what would happen? The buyer would end up probably failing in business. They wouldn't have money for their lawyers. You would stop receiving payments on the note that you bought. Do you want to keep investing to go pursue that guy? Like that, once the door is open to a legal kind of solution, it just ends up costing more and more and more money. Uh, I've often heard it said that those kinds of solutions are really only there for big companies, people with a lot of money. You're looking for a workable solution. Like the reason that I love deal structures that include a good degree of seller financing for buyers of businesses is because you're creating an incentive for the seller not to do these kinds of things, because often those seller notes will have an offset clause saying that if you break our agreement not to compete, or if there's a material misrepresentation that we discover after the fact that you lied to me about something before the deal, I can offset my damages against what I owe you. That opens the door to another thing. If you buy one of these notes that has an offset clause that the buyer then exercises, guess what? The size of your note starts to get cut down. And I don't know how you would navigate around that. I guess you'd have to realize the danger when you did your due diligence on the note and maybe discount it even further against that kind of possibility. I'm a little bit familiar with the different sorts of strategies people apply in the note world. I think that if I was ever, faced with this opportunity to invest in a business note, probably what I might consider would be some sort of partial, you know, like to buy the next 12 or 18 payments or something like that. Because you can look at a business, and if you're familiar with business and financial statements, and you could look at what's going on in that business, you could probably make a pretty good determination if they're solid enough to last for the next year or year and a half. That might give you the confidence to do that partial purchase. But, you know, who knows what's going to happen to a business in 3, 5, 10 years.
Well,
And
that was be my next question. Would you consider something that's been around for 12 months, or would you prefer obviously something that's been around for 5 years when you're structuring, obviously these notes, as you say, you want to be involved with it, but when you're doing your due diligence, I don't think you want something that just opened up like 2 months ago. You obviously want something that's got some sort of business acumen and history behind it too, right?
well, I don't know if a business that's only been over for 2 months could be sold to someone. If somebody
Sure.
would buy that, I guess maybe if someone became ill all of a sudden, maybe that kind of scenario could arise. The um, you know, the concept of seasoning, right? In the world of real estate, there's a concept of seasoning. If the payments have been made for a certain length of time, then we become more certain that it's going to continue to be made. What you're testing there in the world of seasoning a note is you're testing uh, the debtor's personal organization and desire to pay their debts, right? Like like when you see 12 months of on-time payments, you're like, there's a character who goes to work every day, manages their budget, and makes it a priority to make sure that their home note is paid, right? And you're testing the resolve of that individual. That person could still lose their job, right? In which case the seasoning then all of a sudden loses its qualification because now the person just doesn't have the income. In the world of small business, you can have a very profitable, solid small business for decades, and then something completely outside of everybody's control could change. You could have a regulatory change. You could have, a new competitor move in across the street. I've seen restaurants that have been open forever fail because a city spent 6 months replacing water and sewer right in front of the restaurant, and people can't get access to the location. Lately, I've been talking to a lot of people who manufacture stuff out of steel and aluminum who complain that their number one cost just went up by 50%. Like nobody in business has the ability to foresee or control everything. And so one of these, sort of black swan kind of things that happens to someone could very easily derail the business. And so that track record, while it's comforting, it doesn't change the risk profile. There was a central banker back in the 1950s. His name was John Exter, and he came up with something called Exter's inverse pyramid of liquidity. And it's an upside down triangle. And at the bottom point, he put, and this is supposed to represent the various assets people can own. And his idea was that in a time of financial unrest, so some kind of crisis, people would want to trade their assets for more liquid assets. And so at the very bottom point, he put gold, because in those days, the US dollar was backed by gold. And then he put like treasury, like notes, actual paper
Mm-hmm.
money above that. Then he put T bills and then, treasury, longer term notes. And then he got into like public equities, public debt, all that other kind of stuff. And then he just went up and up, and real estate's in there, and investment real estate's in there, and commercial properties in there. At the very top of his pyramid is privately controlled small business. And he put it as the most risky and least liquid asset that there is, just because in order for you to sell a business, you've often got to find someone who not only wants it, but is able to run it and happens to be in the same place that the business is available. With the internet and stuff, there's more fluidity around that where businesses are kind of existing online and people are working more remotely, but they are still the least liquid and riskiest asset class that someone can invest in. And I'm always reminding people of that. Like, I'm always reminding people owning a business can be great because you've got a lot of operational leverage in addition to financial leverage that can really make them profitable and wonderful when everything is firing on all cylinders and they're profitable. But when things turn south, they can turn south fast. And all you have to do is ask anyone who's been in business for 30 or 40 years, and they'll tell you stories either of their own, brush with potential disaster, or they'll tell you the stories of other people they've known who were around for a long time, and then just a bunch of things happened all at once that put them under, unfortunately. And so it's risky. Unlike a house, you got a problem person there who's not paying their note. Well, you get rid of them, you repaint the thing, get it ready for sale, and or there's 101 different ways to get out of it. I guess you're the expert on that, but you're left with that tangible house, and at least you can insure it, right? If it were to burn down or something. And with a business, I love to use the example of a pizzeria. You can have a loved pizzeria in a neighborhood that people love to go to, and you can buy that thing and change the sauce recipe and just turn everybody off. And just like that, you've destroyed the value of the business. Uh, and it's hard to recover from that kind of thing.
So definitely, that as you say, risky. If you don't know the business, got to know it. Be prepared to step into it. Um, when businesses that are providing cash, well, obviously, there's usually a multiplier attached to it as well, right? 4 times, 5 times cash flow, stuff like that. Where are you seeing things these days, and how important is that in your due diligence in seeing if the borrower or the business owner is likely to pay on that note on a regular basis.
Well, the business has to cash flow. So, there's different what we call notional levels of cash flow, and the smallest businesses are sold on multiples of what's called seller's discretionary earnings. And most small businesses sell for between 2 and 2.5 times that number. When they get bigger, they sell for multiples of EBITDA. And then you can get numbers with a higher multiple, like 3, 4, even 5, depending on the industry and the type of business. But you're usually talking about businesses with cash flows in excess of $700,000 when you start to talk about that bucket. So they're significantly bigger. They usually have more in the way of like middle managers, supervisors, like a quote unquote real business machine, versus the smallest businesses, which are basically conducted by their owners. Like
Yeah.
it
Mom and
I
pops.
always use the example of an orchestra and the conductor, right, like that conductor is making sure everyone's playing their instruments together, and if something happens to that person or if they're distracted, the music won't be nice, and that's the cash flow, right? And so the cash flow has to be there. If somebody overpays for a business, and it happens all the time, it's one of the biggest risks that there is in buying a business. What ends up happening is people forget certain things. So I mentioned that they sell for these notional levels of cash flow. Seller's discretionary earnings is one of them, and it's the most common. And we get to seller's discretionary earnings by taking the net income of the company, and then we add back interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and the owner's salary. And then you end up with a number. Maybe it's 300 grand. And that's the way business brokers will advertise the business. They'll say this business produces $300,000 of seller's discretionary earnings. People will get into a deal to buy that business thinking that they will at some point have 300,000 in their hand, and you never will. And the reason is because if you operate the business successfully and profitably, you will have to pay interest on your loan. You'll have to pay taxes to Uncle Sam. You will have to take home money to feed your family. That's a salary. And the equipment and machinery slowly wears out over time, and it's going to have to be replaced. And that's what depreciation represents. Accountants show you things wearing out with depreciation. So those things are real expenses. They've got to be paid. But we value businesses based on that seller's discretionary earnings just because it's so hard to compare one business to another. It's really been the only tool that we have to be able to say, like, amongst restaurants, what do they typically sell for? And when you get back to that SDE level, you can see side by side that they're all trading in the same range, which for small restaurants is less than 2x SDE. Again, because amongst the risky businesses, restaurants are even riskier. It's just it's a tough business.
Yeah, that definitely is a tough business. We see that here in Austin. Definitely, it's the surprise. A lot of restaurants are going out of business, but you also have a lot of food trucks that are starting to pop back up, and even those are struggling in a lot of cases to stay open on a regular basis.
And those are like the promise of a food truck to a restaurateur is that it's a much lower investment, right? A lot less to lay out to get your equipment, like the truck and everything. You're not paying for a room for people to sit in. You're not paying waitresses and waiters. Like it's supposed to be a more efficient thing, but at the end of the day, if you can't sell enough meals, the numbers are just not going to work.
Hmm. Yeah, not going to work at all. We've got you would think Texas barbecue would be one of the easiest things besides Mexican food. I had one of my private investors tell me, "Oh yeah, I invest in Mexican foods because you can't lose money in Mexican foods." And he proceeded to close two of them during COVID and stuff like that. But there's a well-known case of the best barbecue spot here in town. Well, it went out of business. Guy ended up owing $2 to $3 million in unpaid vendors, food, rent, all that stuff because he just couldn't capitalize enough. So I think part of the due diligence is seeing how much business acumen the actual operators have too, right? Besides just being able to be a good cook or a good manager, right?
Well, yeah, and so the requirement to report information to the note holder is created at the outset when the deal is made. And so if the seller of the business was not wise enough to put in the requirements for a lot of this stuff, it's really hard for you as an investor to go talk to the buyer and say, I want to add all of this reporting requirements to you. I want to give you all this extra work just so I can cash out this other guy, right? And and then you would have to know enough about the restaurant trade to be able to look at those numbers and realize if something was going wrong or not. And here's the biggest one. And this is the biggest shocker to people who've not been into business. Scott, did you know that financial statements are made by putting ink onto paper?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. And so when somebody hands you, and then maybe it's a PDF these days, but when somebody hands you that thing, all you know that you're holding is a piece of paper with ink on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the times when people get numbers from accountants, they assume that they're looking at something real. Here at my firm, we help people work on these deals. We help people buy and sell businesses. We start from the assumption that they're full of errors,
Right.
that the numbers are just wrong, and it's not necessarily because someone's trying to commit fraud in any way, but it's because most of the time bookkeeping is done in small businesses by amateurs.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you've ever walked into a building supply store and some teenager is putting in your order onto a computer and prints out a bill, and they're like, "Oh, we made a mistake. I'll just do it again." Well, guess what? They probably didn't blank out the first one properly. And at the end of the day, someone's going to be figuring out why their sales are $100 more than what the till collection is. And and then if nobody has time, they're just going to round it off into some kind of over short account, and the books are going to be off. And this is normal in the world of small business. And if there's enough money in the bank account to pay the bills, these errors often accumulate over time, and the reporting data just isn't accurate. One of the this actually just came up the other day. Someone was looking for help to look at a business, and the accounts receivable were huge. And so, like, this was $1 million a year business, and the accounts receivable were $300,000, and that is 90 days of sales. And usually you expect people to pay you in 30. And so when we asked the seller, what is your policy on payment? They were like, well, when we finish a job, people have 30 days to pay, and we pretty much collect from everyone. So where's the discrepancy here? Why was the balance sheet showing so much in receivables when the seller was telling us that everyone pays in 30 days? Well, here's what was happening. He would sign a contract. It was a window door place. So he would sign a contract with you to install some windows in your house, and he would collect a deposit at the time when they took the measurements. And technically, what he should have been doing is he should have been recording the deposit as a liability to his company. And then when the windows arrived and he installed them, then he should have recorded it as a sale at that moment and applied the deposit against it, and then given you the invoice for the balance, which you would pay in 30 days. What he was doing instead is he was recording it as a sale the day you signed the contract. And then he was putting your deposit as the first payment. And then while he waited for the windows to come from the factory and then waited for his crews to install them, which could be 60 days, then he would install them and give you the bill for the final amount. But what it was sitting on his balance sheet as a receivable when it was not, in fact, a receivable. So other people had looked at this business and they were all saying, we don't understand how we can get the operating capital to finance the receivables. And we were able to figure out pretty quickly there's no operating capital required because the receivables aren't real. And this kind of thing happens all the time in small business. It doesn't get caught by people like CPAs because that firm at the end of the year, they're going to file a tax return, which is accurate for tax purposes. They're going to pay the taxes they owe. No one's ever going to come and say you are reporting when the sale occurs. But when you're analyzing the business to make an investment, these kinds of things are important. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we do with people.
No, it makes a lot of sense there because you always know things that the books can be cooked in one way or another if it's just a mom and pop operating, or maybe intentionally. What pops to mind is I don't know if you heard about a guy by the name of Barry Minkow who went to jail for running a Ponzi scheme as like an 18-year-old kid on a cleaning system called ZZZ Best, where he was fake creating invoices for commercial cleaning on projects and getting and saying insurance is paying them. And he actually took the company public with no inventory, no sales and stuff like that. There's a show. There's
There's
a
a
show called Con Men out there. Now the guy's doing due diligence on apartment syndications and fraud taking place in that aspect of things these days.
there's a great book out. I interviewed the author on my YouTube channel, and he wrote a book about this guy who had a stereo shop chain in New York City and pulled some of the same tricks. I, when people want to be fraudulent, there's no limit to their creativity. I actually had someone tell me that they had a friend that wanted to sell their laundromat and would go there every day after work to put $60 worth of quarters in his own machines. Right. And it was to juice the numbers to make it look like there were more sales being recorded than really there were. And when you're dealing with potentially someone who's acting in that way, uh, it's hard to catch them. Like you really have to know the industry. Back in my business broker days, I was trying to sell a pizzeria, and different people, we prepare a package called a business profile, which kind of talks about the business and what the numbers are and everything. And this guy came in. He was experienced in the pizza business, had had his own shop for 20 years, was married to a college professor. So he sold his shop when she got a new job at the local college here. And so he was looking for a new place. And he looked at the numbers and then he looked at me and he said, all I need to know is what the rent is and how many kilos of cheese they buy every week. And from that one number, kilos of cheese, he knew how many pies were going through that shop. That was the only number he trusted because that's he knew the
It's a
business, right?
tangible number. You know what I mean?
And so like people that I know in the laundry business will say you got to look at the water bill. The water bill doesn't lie. That like how much water is going through, and you can do the math. You can know how much water is used in each wash cycle, and you can calculate it and then match that to the numbers you see on the sales and see if it makes sense or not.
But that's having tangible knowledge of that business. If you're buying the
Correct.
note on that, you don't know that.
Well,
Um,
and this just heightens the danger,
sure,
right?
sure, definitely. So, what you tell them, folks out there, buyer beware. Do your due diligence. May not be the best thing to invest. Might be one of the more stupidest things.
It's you know business can be a game changer for a lot of
Yeah.
people. It's also very risky, and that's the message I try to get across to people. And it's just if you're going to get into business, you have to build a base of knowledge and understanding, and know what you're getting into. And there's all kinds of like people out there who are kind of cheerleaders on the internet who are saying, burn the ships, go full forward, no plan Bs, all that kind of stuff. But in the real world, the people who survive at this stuff are ones who very much have plan Bs. They understand exactly where they stand. They know what could go wrong and how they would deal with it before that thing happens. And they're cautious and they're careful, right? If you lunge full force forward all the time and you leverage everything to the max and you're just going full speed, any little bump in the economy can derail you. And we see that every time we have a downturn. And we haven't seen a downturn in quite some time. I think we might have one coming up here soon, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
How much has AI affected your business? I know it's obviously affecting businesses across the country, but where are you seeing the biggest impact, either positive or negative, David?
It's interesting because what is happening over the last 10 years is we've got more and more people that are coming into this world of small businesses, and they're trying to do deals and buy businesses from the internet. Like they're trying to do everything from behind a screen. And as these AI tools come in, they're trying to apply these AI tools to manipulating data and better managing things that they're finding on the internet. But you know, when a lot of the information that is available is full of errors, it doesn't matter how easily or quickly you manipulate it, you're still going to get crappy outputs. And most like 80% of the businesses that go up for sale on a website like Biz Buy Sell don't sell. And anecdotally, from the deals we work on, 80% of businesses that change hands do not ever get to a business broker or get on those websites. They're deals that are being made between people that meet each other and know each other and work on a deal and have a closing. So whenever I meet someone who says I'm frustrated because of what I find on these online business for sale websites, I always say, like, you're looking at 20% of the market, and 80% of what's there we already know is crap that won't sell. So that means it's probably not worth buying. And what's happening is people are niching themselves into a bad space with not a lot of opportunity because they're not getting out in the world and actually doing business, right? And that's what I always encourage people to do is AI is really important in something like due diligence. You can feed mountains of paperwork into an AI and you can get all kinds of reports on any patterns that it notices or ideas it has based on what you feed it. And it's making an impact in those spaces, but actually finding the deals and talking to people and getting someone to agree to terms in a business deal that work for you and them, it's all done face to face. It's done over the phone. It's done by actually building relationships. And so, you know, AI is exciting, but it's those deal making skills and those relationship building skills that I think are still very important for people. And more and more I'm hearing people say if AI is taking over all of the mindless, monotonous jobs, we all better double down on being human. And building relationships is extremely human.
So true. So true with that. And I don't think you're having an AI bot that's going to fix your air conditioning or your unclog your plumbing or some other things out there too that are, I
Oh,
think
it will. It'll just order you a new one. You,
that's
you'll just get it. You'll just get a delivery at your front step. Here you go.
Now, you mentioned something. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on social media, especially I know a guy by the name of Roland Frazier. You've probably heard of him, stuff out there. Learned a lot of marketing from him back in the day. But it's the same thing. Oh, we're gonna go to a workshop and we're gonna teach you how to buy your first business and stuff like that. That's not a lot of in-person contact with actual business owners. Like you said, only 20% of those online or business sold with the online stuff, like you mentioned, huh?
Yeah, and so think about this. If someone has, say, a Ford dealership, who is the most likely buyer of a Ford dealership?
Another Ford
An-
dealership, right?
Another Ford dealer. And those people all know each other from their conferences and their meetings and things like that. And so there's these natural networks of people that exist in the world of business. And so when I'm working with someone who wants to buy a business, one of the first things I recommend is that you actually create a target of what kind of business you want to buy, what industry, what size, etc. And then you have to get yourself into that network. So you've got to actually meet people that own businesses. You want to meet the people who sell to those companies. You want to meet all the people in the ecosystem. You want to become an associate member of their trade group, maybe go to their conference. Like you want to make inroads into that community and make it known that you're looking for a deal in that industry. Because the top 5 reasons that people sell a business, none of them are cashing out. The top 5, because we talked about how low they sell for as a multiple
Yeah.
of cash flow. So the biggest reasons people sell a small business is burnout, boredom, and fatigue, divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and retirement. Retirement is the only one that people plan for. The other 4 are just things that happen in life. And so if you meet somebody and you say, I want to buy your business, and they say, I'm not interested in selling, that's fine. You just have to wait, because if one of those things happens, you can get a phone call. And the people that I work with, the buyers I work with, they'll do like letter campaigns. And I'm sure, people that buy real estate and stuff do
Yeah.
this too. They'll do these letter campaigns and stuff, and they'll hear from a few people. But then over the course of the next 2 years, they'll hear from more and more people who got those original letters. And it's just these circumstances come up, and all of a sudden people are now interested. They want to have a conversation. And if you are a business owner and you know someone who wants to buy your business, it's easier to call that person back and have a conversation than it is to, engage with a business broker and start that whole thing. And that the business broker is going to end up charging you a fee of some kind. And so, people are thinking it's faster and easier maybe and won't cost me as much if I just deal with a buyer. Uh, it's hard to make a business deal. It doesn't always work out, quickly or easily or anything like that. But this is what happens in the marketplace is you get these people that are doing direct private outreach and they're getting a lot of the deals. And especially if you're a buyer that has some kind of track record, if you've managed a certain kind of business for years and years, it's going to be easier for sellers to see that you're going to be qualified as a buyer. And that seller is going to be more likely then to maybe do some seller financing for you, because they know that you're experienced and you know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's I totally agree. The seller financing side that makes a lot of sense and is done a lot that way. It's just that hey, you probably don't want to be in the secondary market for a seller finance note on a business.
Yeah, it would be risky. Like like if somebody said to me, I'm going to sell this business and I want you to buy the note, if I was involved in the creation of the note, well, I'd also have to be an expert in that business. So
Right.
it would be tough. Honestly, it would be tough. Yeah. Like I said, I think that the only real opportunity I would personally look at would be some kind of partial, like buy 12 or 18 payments. Um, just you can have a much more confidence in what's going to happen over the short term than
Mhm.
trying to
We,
stretch your crystal ball out years.
right. There's a guy out of Dallas, Tom Henderson, still around. Probably was at the event in Vegas with Bill Mancaro. Talk
I
about
met
his,
Tom. Yeah.
yeah, buy, I'll give you 10 for 12. I'll give you 10 for 12.
Oh, what did he call that? The perpetual partial?
Yeah, exactly. Every year I'll give you 10 for 12, but like it says, it minimizes the risk and you're going to make a 20% return on your
Yeah.
money that way. It's not a bad way to think of it, but he's not going and buying, oh, yeah, I'll give you 60 months or 120 months, stuff like that. Just doesn't, 10 for 12 on that might be a good way to check it, test it out and see if you want to do a deeper dive if it makes sense for you. So
Yeah.
good stuff, David. What's the best way for our listeners out there to reach out to you, connect with you, and follow what you're doing? Obviously, they need to go
Sure.
buy both of these books first and foremost. I've got both
Yeah.
of them here.
If you look up David C. Barnett on Amazon, I've got 10 books now. They're all about buying and selling small businesses, small business investing. But if you're just interested in this space, if you want to learn about business deals, about how people, buy businesses or get them ready for sale, all that kind of stuff, just type David C. Barnett small business into any podcast player or YouTube, and I'll come right up to the top. My YouTube channel just celebrated 11 years. We've got 800 videos and audio tracks on the podcast
Congrats,
feed.
man.
So there's tons of content there for anyone who's interested in learning about this stuff.
When are you going to upload all that to like an AI bot so it clones yourself?
We are working on a lot of that kind of thing. I've got a group coaching program that's been going since 2018, and we just recently got everything transcribed. And we are now creating a query bot that where you can ask it questions and it will bring up snippets of conversation from the group that touch on those things. So the people in the group are testing it right now, but it's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, there's definite value in some of this AI stuff, especially when you're asking it to do things that are really well suited to
Right.
computers, like managing large volumes of information. Like computers are great at that, and much faster, of course, obviously than us. We used to create a list of topics for each one of our meetings, and we had a book that was like a user companion, and people used to control F it in Acrobat, right? And to find where people were having these conversations. And we're still doing it, but we're probably going to be getting rid of it soon in favor of just using that AI.
So we created an AI clone with all our 2,000 videos, podcast episodes, classes, and then even me appearing on 400 other podcasts. Upload that all into Delphi, and it's a pretty interesting clone in text or audio back to people asking questions. The big caveat is I had to go in and delete a lot of the old stuff and make sure, because that you want to upload the newest stuff first because it's the most accurate. The older stuff, obviously, we know changes over time as things happen. So I had to go back
Right.
and I had to re-upload stuff differently with newer stuff first. But it's been a huge asset in taking FAQs and asking a lot of questions for folks typing out stuff. Might be something to think about for you on that.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, David, as always, thank you so much. I know you've got a busy schedule ahead of you. Once again, guys, the books are A Guide to Keep You from Going Broke, Buying versus Starting a Small Business. And the other one is 21 Stupid Things People Do When Trying to Buy a Business. Maybe we need to put in there 10 stupid things you do when you're buying a business note. That'd be the next one as well. So go out, take some action, everybody. Thank you again, David, and we'll see you at the top.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Bye. Hey, real estate investors, this is Scott Carson. I'm known across the country as a note guy. For the past 20 years, I've been buying distressed assets, primarily non-performing notes on residential commercial properties. And if you've ever wanted to learn how to dive in to start buying non-performing notes from banks, hedge funds, or other investors like yourself, then there's no greater place than to get the nuts and bolts, the A to Z, the 1 through 99 place to get started is our virtual note buying workshop. We've been teaching this class since 2010 on how to find, fund, flip non-performing notes, how to get banks to call you with deals that you can cherry pick. And no, you don't need millions. No, you don't need a lot of experience to start looking at non-performing deals. We get lists of notes from banks, hedge funds on a regular basis, not one or two or three or four, but hundreds of deals that we can evaluate and cherry pick. Whether we're looking for performing notes or non-performing notes that we can get reperforming, or non-performing notes you can foreclose and take back, whatever your niche or whatever you would like to focus on, we can help make it happen at the Virtual Note Buying Workshop. It's a 3-day class. Our next one is April 18th to the 20th. It's actually online live via Zoom. You get signed up by going to notebuyingfordummies.com. That's notebuyingfordummies.com. Day one is all about how to find these assets. How do you find asset managers? How do you find lists of people to reach out to that you don't have to spend thousands of dollars on postcards or letters that you waste money on? We don't do that. Day two is all about raising capital and marketing and how to create a business that feeds itself, that you can do part-time, 10 hours a week, 5 hours a week, depending on what your focus is. We'll show you a game plan to achieve deal flow coming in on autopilot versus you having to send a ton of money. And also, we'll show you how to raise capital like nobody else does. And then day three is all about the flip. How do we structure deals? How do we evaluate a tape to find the deals from the duds? All right. We'll show you what vendors to use. We'll give you a 200+ page manual, contracts, sample forms, all the stuff that you need to be a lean, mean note buying machine when you get wrapped up. Now, yes, this is live April 18th through the 20th online via Zoom. Get signed up today. We'll send you the replays of the previous online workshop so you can start learning, start evaluating material, and get rock and rolling. And if for some reason you don't like our class, we have a 100% money back guarantee involved with it. If at the end of the first day you don't like what we talk about, you don't think it's impactful, just let me know. We'll refund back your tuition, no questions asked. We don't want your money. We want you to become a note buyer. We want you to become a lien lord. All right. Like I said, if you're tired of dealing with toilet sinks and trash outs, you don't want to deal with renters, then becoming a note investor is the path for you. Everybody evolves into a note investor at some point, but there are plenty of opportunities out there. There are millions of non-performing notes that you can cherry pick. No, it's not all junk. It can be small value all the way up to $1 million homes or $1 million apartments for you. So much opportunity is taking place right now in the chaotic market that we see. And who's going to come out on top? Note investors will. So take the time, get signed up today, April 18th to 20th. Go to notebuyingfordummies.com or go to our website, weclosenotes.com, and sign up for the virtual workshop there. As always, get signed up today. We run discounts all the time. The cost of tuition is you plus your partner or spouse. So get signed up today at notebuyingfordummies.com, and we'll see you at the top.